Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Garrity.
And welcome, everyone, to the Thursday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Jim Garrity is not here today. He's off at the National Review Ideas Summit. Hopefully he's got some good ones. Rob Long, contributing editor at National Review, co-founder of Ricochet and co-host of the GOP podcast on Ricochet, of course, is filling in for Jim today and on Friday. Rob, great to have you.
Great to be here. I don't know why. Why are we not at the Ideas Conference? That seems like the kind of thing smart people should be at. I don't get where my invitation was.
Yeah, what's the message being sent to us here that we're still doing that?
Message received. We don't have ideas. Well, they might be right about me, I got to say.
All right. Well, we're back to our usual format today. Earlier this week, we had quite a few goods, given the Mueller report and Michael Avenatti and different stories like that. But today, we're a little more traditional. Let's start with the good martini. This comes to us courtesy of Reuters. U.S. President Donald Trump on Wednesday called on Russia to pull its troops from Venezuela and said that all options were open to make that happen. The arrival of 2 Russian Air Force planes outside Caracas on Saturday, believed to be carrying nearly 100 Russian special forces and cybersecurity personnel, has escalated the political crisis in Venezuela. Russia and China have backed President Nicolas Maduro, while the United States and most other Western countries support opposition leader Juan Guaido. In January, Guaido invoked the Constitution to assume Venezuela's interim presidency, arguing that Maduro's 2018 re-election was illegitimate. Trump telling reporters in the Oval Office, Russia has to get out. So, Rob, seems like every step of the way the Trump administration's doing the right thing here. The fact that the Russians are trying to dig in makes us a little bit worried that this could escalate beyond where we'd like it to, obviously. But what do you make of what Trump's doing here?
Well, look, he didn't have that many choices. The provocations keep coming. It is good news when an American president in the 21st century still believes in the Monroe Doctrine. That's a good thing. We still have that. Look, there's a very complicated dance going on about Venezuela, because the only way the opposition wins is if America gets involved. And Venezuela is kind of a little pivoting point, because Cuba has relied on Venezuela, but of course they're both falling apart now economically. So it does seem to me like this is the provocation for us to get involved in the regime change there, which is another set of problems. So this is a good one, but I think it's leading to a very, very dangerous part, which I'm not sure. I don't have a solution to it, but Trump is going to be facing what will be at some point a huge, huge cry for American troops to go to Venezuela. This issue may slip into other columns, into other categories when that happens.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's at stake for Russia here? They've got their friends in the region that they've had for a long time, like the Cubans, right, and obviously other socialist regimes, which are not all that infrequent, unfortunately, in Latin America. But other than that, I mean, this is a failed state. You'd think they'd just kind of look the other way and say, oh, well, problems with Venezuela. I guess that's just the way it's going to go.
Well, look, Russia is following pretty much the same foreign policy as it did under communism. It just isn't about communism. It's more bold. The gloves are off. It's really just about territory and influence and mischief making. And they would love to have a sort of reliable mischief making presence in South America and mischief making presence 90 miles off the coast of Florida. That was a really good thing for them. Russians always feel like they don't have any ability to project their power overseas. They've felt that way since the czars. So this is like another way to do it. But it's also kind of a incredibly low rent way to do it. I mean, 100 people were sent in 2 planes. This feels more like needling America and needling us and making sure that we feel the pressure to get involved in Venezuela than it is about actual Venezuelan geopolitics for the Russians. They can't afford another client. Certainly they can't afford 2. So their end game really is to make trouble for Americans, which is what they're doing.
Let's bring this back to the fact that it's our good martini and the fact that the.
Oh yeah, sorry. but it's good when any American president. I mean, let's just be fair. Takes a stand and says, no, we can't have this. We can't have a foreign power meddling in our hemisphere. That's a good thing. I think in general, Monroe Doctrine, I think it was a really good doctrine. I'm glad we have it. And then the second thing is that I feel like Trump, in many ways, became president because he articulated a feeling among some conservatives and people on the right in general that we spent too much time in foreign adventures overseas that didn't have a clear American interest at stake. It's hard to argue that Venezuela and a disaster in Venezuela doesn't have an American interest at stake. And so in many ways, it's kind of good to have a president like Trump who already has established the fact that he doesn't want to have a lot of adventures overseas, but will do what it takes to maintain American security. And that's a good thing.
All right, let's move to our bad martini now. Robin, stop me if you've heard this one before. It looks like Republicans might not be ready to have an alternative to Obamacare if it goes away. Of course, it's been a full decade now since Barack Obama took office, and Democrats controlled both houses of Congress at the time, and they started putting together their plans. It was ultimately signed into law almost exactly 9 years ago at this point, March of 2010. And last year, of course, they tried to repeal and sort of replace, or I guess sort of repeal and sort of replace,
right.
And that failed. And now they're trying to go through the courts again, and the Justice Department is on board with this effort to strike it down because the John Roberts rationale of the law survives as a tax because of the penalty for failing to comply with the individual mandate has been zeroed out. There's no more tax, there's no more penalty, so therefore it's unconstitutional. But Politico, President Donald Trump says the GOP is now the party of health care, but Republicans have no real plan to deliver on that. Trump's unexpected demand that Republicans take another crack at replacing Obamacare came on the heels of his Justice Department backing a lawsuit intended to gut the entire law. The last time the party tried to get rid of Obamacare, it cost them control of the House and several state capitals. Those lessons aren't lost on Republicans. They know the more they talk about repealing Obamacare, the more likely it is that the battle over the health law and the popular protections for people with pre-existing conditions drags into the 2020 elections, damaging vulnerable Republicans. They'd rather slow walk the issue while sticking to health care topics that have appeal on both sides of the aisle. So, Rob, this is, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, going on 6 election cycles where Republicans have promised to get rid of this thing, and they still don't have a strategy.
Well, it's true. It's true. It's because it's so horrible. I totally get it. I wouldn't want to have a strategy to do this either. There is that thing you got to get over, which is it's a mess. And we didn't create the mess. The Democrats created the mess and made it unconstitutional. And so why do we have to fix it if the Republicans are saying it? And there's some value to that, too. It's like, well, wait a minute. Why is this our problem? But it is the Republicans' problem because they've said they're going to repeal it and replace. They haven't just said repeal because repeal without replace isn't a popular option. So they got to replace it with something. And ultimately the problem is that true replacements for what we call the umbrella term of healthcare are complicated and aren't associated with each other. And parts of them will actually look a little like Obamacare, right? I mean, there's certain things about Obamacare that we would probably keep if we were going to, build a new business, a new healthcare plan from the ground up. But also everybody's playing the same game, which is that if you're a Democrat right now, you are running on this sort of larger, big picture, 50,000-foot issue, which is Medicare for all or some version of Medicare for all, which is a great thing to say because it's meaningless and B, it's utterly unaffordable. And so if you're a Republican, you're looking for what's my thing that's also bland and huge and will be satisfying, but I won't have to put any details to. And there isn't one because being against something is more complicated than being for something. So I sympathize with them. I think they're in a terrible position, but I'm not sure there's a way. I'm not sure there's a way out of it, except to come up with. I think the solution is for them politically is to come up with one or two little bits of reform that people agree with, and kind of Frankenstein monster the reform policy by policy. The success that Republicans have been like attacking Obamacare policies, right? The mandate, things like that. That's actually a smart move because it isn't global but it's not as satisfying. And, people, who supported Republicans want a big moment where Obamacare is repealed and we never have to hear the word again. And I that's an impossible thing to happen. I think the piecemeal strategy is smart. It just isn't, you don't set off fireworks and parades and send fundraising letters off of a piecemeal policy change.
Yeah, that's probably right. And the thing I'm hearing most, and it kind of goes back to the Lindsey Graham, Bill Cassidy approach, was let's just give the authority back to the states, which on the one hand is good federalism. On the other hand, it's really easy for federal lawmakers to say that so they don't actually have to make the tricky decisions.
Yeah, well, that's good. That's constitutional. That's all right. The founders knew that. They had that. They had that already in their heads. Send it back home. Send everything back home. But there are federal guidelines that are going to obviously be part of this of whatever reform happens, and they should just be conservative ones. And there's no reason. The problem is that it's not going to be fun, but one or two judicious, good sounding reforms could actually be what they policymakers would call the headshot to the overall policy. Once you stop forcing people to buy plans that they don't want to buy, that is in many ways the headshot to the policy. It just doesn't feel as good as a banner and a repeal, and then you get to go on TV and say we did it and it's all over, and it just doesn't. It's just not going to be satisfying. But sometimes really good policy and really good reforms aren't satisfying.
That could be. And those who think that just because the penalty's gone, don't assume that John Roberts won't come up with another reason to say it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, if you believe the Constitution is a living document, you can say anything you want. It just depends on how you woke up that morning.
All right, let's move on to our crazy martini now, Rob. And if there's one thing America needs, it's more Democrats running for president, because clearly we don't have enough right now. Let's go to CNN. Terry McAuliffe is moving closer to a 2020 presidential run. Democrats close to the former Virginia governor tell CNN. McAuliffe has been telling Democratic allies that he is leaning toward jumping into the Democratic presidential race next month, according to 3 people who have spoken to him. The former governor has long said he would make a decision by the end of March, with a potential announcement later in April. McAuliffe's possible entry into the 2020 race would make him the 3rd current or former governor, joining former Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper and Washington Governor Jay Inslee, and the only Virginian in the crowded field of more than a dozen Democrats. Quote, "I get the sense that he's moving closer," said John Morgan, longtime donor to Democratic causes and McAuliffe's friend. "I think he's very close to it." Crystal Carson, McAuliffe's spokesman, said the governor is seriously considering a run, but that he has yet to make a decision. While McAuliffe has spent the last week on a spring break vacation with his family, he has also been making calls to donors and longtime friends as he comes closer to making a final decision. One friend described him as, quote, "almost ready to jump in. He sees no reason not to," unquote. And, Rob, there's a couple of weeks ago when the flurry of candidates jumping in here, there was an interesting story. I think it might have been over on Free Beacon, said a lot of high-dollar Democratic donors are sitting on their wallets waiting to see what Terry McAuliffe would do, which, when you look at all these different names in there, seems kind of crazy. But since he was the guy who ran the DNC and tapped everybody's wallets for years and years, it makes you wonder if he got in this thing, whether he could become a serious player.
Yeah, we know one thing about Terry McAuliffe. He knows how to raise money. This feel like in the 90s, though, when I read that story, I was like, wait a minute, what happened? did we lose time here? I mean, it is the ultimate nostalgia vote, right? It's not just wanting to have the Clinton 90s again. It's actually trying to recreate them. With Madame Tussauds Wax Museum, see if we put enough of those figures together, we can have it. But look, that I get it, because the problem with the Democrats is that they are a party with incredibly progressive, popular candidates, but they're still funded by a bunch of rich white guys. And that's a problem, because the rich white guys think they know everything, because rich people tend in general to think they know everything. And they kind of are worried because if you live in America, if you live in the real country, you easily see a way that Donald Trump is reelected in 2020. If you live in crazy town, it's just impossible to believe that anybody would vote for Donald Trump again in 2020. And so why not? This is a perfect time to elect a socialist. Say what you like about millionaires, they do tend to do things like, run businesses. And so they tend to be more in America than media progressives. So they tend to wait a minute. Like in my state, they say there's a whole lot of votes here for Donald Trump, people that I respect and like. We're not going to win in the crucial states that we need to win if we're running communist, essentially. Right. And one thing we know about Terry McAuliffe is he ain't no communist. He's a millionaire businessman. And he's the ultimate, probably the most powerfully connected backroom Democrat in America. So he's a perfect choice, a perfect antidote. And he's not old, and he doesn't do a lot of gaffes like Joe Biden. But there is this, you can see it in the Democratic Party, and you can feel it in their sort of the tectonic, subterranean moves. And of course, every rich Democrat I know, because I live in Hollywood, they all say the same thing, which is, we could lose this in 2020. And the only way to win it is to appeal to some of the voters who voted for Donald Trump. And they're just not persuaded by socialism, but they might be persuaded by a zillionaire businessman who was a governor of a big state. The ultimate alternative to Howard Schultz.
Yeah, zillionaire businessmen are all the rage, even though people say they hate them. A couple of quick addenda here. Jim Garrity and I both live in Virginia, so while we didn't vote for Terry McAuliffe, he was our governor for 4 years, and we have grudgingly come to the realization that in the last decade, out of the last 3 governors, he's actually the least ethically challenged. Because you had Bob McDonnell and his gift problem.
That is not a high bar, my friend. He's the least corrupt cop in the 1933 Chicago Police Department.
Oh, man, Chicago law enforcement. That get us on a whole rabbit trail.
I should say the 2019 Chicago Police Department. I don't know why I felt I needed to be historical here. You're right.
Oh, man. And you mentioned Hollywood. And for folks who don't know, you've worked in Hollywood a number of different ways. You've been a screenwriter and that sort of thing there. And so when you talk about flashing back to the 90s, maybe even the 80s, in addition to some people still wanting to get the Clinton gang back together, you also have, of course, these huge interest in rebooting 80s and 90s TV shows. So is this a realization on America's part that the 80s and 90s were really the golden era of entertainment? And it's not just the people who grew up in that era, but it really was the best time.
Well, it was the best time for me because I was making real money back then. That's that's the most important thing. I don't know how anybody else judges anything else other than that. Hey, look, that was a great time. I actually feel like the best time is now. I mean, I think this is a great time for entertainment. I think you have more choices. But what people complain about now isn't that there's nothing on; it's that there's too much on. Isn't that there's like everything's terrible? It's like, well, the good stuff I can't find, but it's good, and there's good stuff on. And so I mean, I don't know. I feel like that especially as a sort of a conservative person with a free market bent, consumer choice leads to better quality. And you have more choice now, and so you're going to have better quality. If only we treated public education the way we treat our entertainment, by offering people as many different choices as possible and as many different payment plans as possible, and leaving it up to them to make the choice.
Republicans, are you listening to that on healthcare too? Take that to heart.
Yeah, right. Yeah. No, I think a really simple 2-sentence thing in healthcare would be really, rather than a bunch of policies, a 2-sentence set of principles, and then kind of tack it, death of 1,000 cuts.
Rob, great to have you with us today, and we'll do it again tomorrow. Have a good one.
Great to be here.
Absolutely. Rob Long, contributing editor at National Review. He's the co-founder of Ricochet, co-host of the GOP podcast. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Join us again on Friday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.